And on the sidelines, Saskatchewan joined Alberta and Ontario's partnership to build new energy and trade infrastructure such as pipelines and rail lines.
What if a single political decision could reshape an entire nation's economy and its political map?
All three premiers stressed the need for a pipeline from Alberta to Ontario that's solely on Canadian soil.
In a stunning turn of events, a quiet disagreement between Canada's federal government and its largest energy province has exploded into a full-scale collision. The stakes couldn't be higher. A multi-billion-dollar pipeline project, the economic future of a region, and the very autonomy of a province.
We can't chance it any longer. We need to be independent. We need a pipeline going to southwestern Ontario to one of the refineries and be self-reliant.
This isn't just another political squabble. It's a high-stakes standoff that's sending shockwaves across the country and forcing a national reckoning over who truly controls Canada's energy future. Recent events have brought the issue of energy infrastructure and provincial autonomy in Canada to the forefront. A significant development has been the collaboration among three provinces, Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario. They've signed a memorandum of understanding with a shared vision of economic growth and prosperity, focusing on a coordinated approach to building oil and gas pipelines and expanding trade corridors to international markets. This agreement aims to boost exports of crucial homegrown resources like energy, potash, critical minerals, and agricultural products. This provincial alliance signals a unified push to advance these projects and strengthen Canada's position in global markets. However, this provincial effort has emerged against a backdrop of a major political confrontation. Alberta had been negotiating a pipeline deal with private U.S. energy firms, a project intended to unlock new export capacity for the province's oil sands. The goal was to move more bitumen and synthetic crude to refineries in the American Midwest and Gulf Coast. This was not a revival of the previously rejected Keystone XL pipeline, but rather a new proposal with a similar logic: more capacity, fewer bottlenecks, and direct access to American buyers. The project was designed to build on existing infrastructure, with a new pipeline route running south through Montana and North Dakota. It was projected to cost between $8 and $10 billion, with almost all funding coming from private investors, requiring no federal money, only regulatory approval. From Alberta's perspective, this deal was crucial for its economic future. The province's economy is heavily reliant on energy exports, and for years, limited pipeline capacity and rising transport costs have forced producers to ship crude by rail, which is a slower, more expensive, and less reliable option. A new dedicated pipeline would have increased export volumes, improved profit margins, and created thousands of jobs, both directly and indirectly. Alberta's government also argued that the project would be an environmental improvement. The reasoning was that new, more efficient pipeline technology would lower emissions per barrel compared to relying on rail transport. Additionally, they pointed to the strong U.S. interest in Canadian heavy oil as a stable and reliable alternative to less dependable international sources. The province felt that everything was in place. The industry wanted it, U.S. buyers were on board, the economics were sound, and they weren't asking Ottawa for any financial contribution, just a green light to proceed. But that green light never came. The federal government, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, gave a swift and final response. Carney's administration declined to support the pipeline deal. There was no prolonged public debate or extensive review period. The federal cabinet, following recommendations from the Environment and Natural Resources Ministries, quietly indicated that it would not approve any new cross-border pipelines. The core reason for this rejection was Ottawa's broader climate policy. Prime Minister Carney had made it clear from the beginning of his term that Canada's energy future would be defined by its transition targets, not by expanding fossil fuel infrastructure. His government has aligned itself with international climate frameworks and financial institutions that are pushing for decarbonization. The message has been consistent. Canada will be a leader in green policy, even if it comes with a short-term economic cost. In private discussions, Federal officials explained that the proposed pipeline was simply out of step with Canada's climate commitments. They argued that building new pipelines would lock the country into decades of emissions-heavy production, which would directly undermine the nation's net zero goals. From a policy standpoint, they saw the project not just as a bad fit, but as a move in the wrong direction entirely. There were also political considerations at play. Provinces like Quebec and certain parts of Ontario have shown strong public and political resistance to fossil fuel expansion. Supporting a major Alberta U.S. pipeline could have alienated voters in these key regions, which are central to federal liberal and centrist support. By blocking the deal, Ottawa reinforced its alignment with climate-conscious constituencies, particularly in urban areas. The rejection was more than just about this one project. It was a strong signal. It indicated that Carney's government does not see Alberta's oil strategy as a part of the national plan. Instead, the federal emphasis is on electrification, hydrogen, critical minerals, and renewable infrastructure. Traditional oil exports are being moved down the list of priorities, regardless of the demand for them south of the border. To Alberta, this was not just a policy decision, but a deliberate economic blockade, and the province made it clear it would not let it go unchallenged. The federal decision has created a powerful fault line in Canadian politics. The clash between Alberta's economic aspirations and the federal government's climate agenda is no longer a quiet, backroom disagreement. It has become a public and open confrontation that highlights the deep divisions within the country. While Alberta is pushing for greater energy autonomy and market access for its resources, Ottawa is focused on a national transition to a low-carbon economy. This fundamental disagreement has set the stage for a period of political and economic friction that could have lasting consequences for Canada's future. The alignment of Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario on this matter shows that the opposition to federal policy is not isolated, but is a growing regional movement. The debate is now squarely in the public eye, with each side making its case for what is best for Canada's future. This is not just a matter of economics or environment, but one of national identity and the direction of the country as a whole. The outcome of this standoff will likely determine the balance of power between the provinces and the federal government for years to come. The recent conflict over a proposed cross-border pipeline has brought into sharp focus the differing visions for Canada's energy future. On one side, Alberta's government, driven by a desire to secure its economic prosperity, saw a new pipeline as a straightforward, logical solution. On the other, the federal government, under Prime Minister Mark Carney, viewed the project through the lens of national climate policy and international commitments. The clash between these two perspectives reveals the complex challenges facing Canada as it navigates the global energy transition. Alberta's case for the pipeline was rooted in practical economics. The province had been quietly negotiating with several major U.S. energy companies for a project that would move more bitumen and synthetic crude from the oil sands to refineries in the American Midwest and Gulf Coast. This was not a reimagining of a previous controversial project, but a new initiative built on a similar principle: increase export capacity, reduce transport bottlenecks, and provide direct access to American markets. The plan was to create a new pipeline route running south through Montana and North Dakota, leveraging existing infrastructure where possible. This would have been a massive undertaking, with a projected cost of $8 to $10 billion. Crucially, almost all of this investment was expected to come from private sources, including Canadian and American firms, meaning no federal funding was being requested from Ottawa. The only thing Alberta needed was the federal government's regulatory approval. For Alberta, the stakes were incredibly high. The province's economy has long been powered by its energy exports. In recent years, limited pipeline capacity has become a significant obstacle, forcing producers to rely more on rail transport. This method is not only slower and more expensive, but also more prone to logistical delays, which negatively impacts profitability and investment. A new pipeline would have addressed these issues directly by increasing export volumes and improving profit margins for producers. It was also expected to create thousands of jobs, both in construction and related industries, which would have been a major boost for the provincial economy. Beyond the purely economic arguments, Alberta's government also framed the pipeline deal as an environmental improvement. The argument was that building new, modern pipeline infrastructure would lead to a reduction in overall emissions per barrel of oil. This would be achieved by transitioning crude transport away from less efficient rail systems and toward newer, more technologically advanced pipelines. They also highlighted the fact that American refineries were interested in Canadian heavy crude as a stable alternative to more volatile international energy sources, which could contribute to broader energy security for North America. From Alberta's point of view, the project was a win-win. It was supported by the industry, had ready buyers in the U.S., made economic sense, and didn't require federal money. All they needed was a simple regulatory green light. However, that green light was never given. The federal government's response was definitive and quick. Prime Minister Mark Carney's administration chose not to support the pipeline deal. The decision was not a surprise to those following the government's policy direction. Carney had made it a central tenet of his mandate that Canada's energy future would be defined by its commitment to climate targets, not by the expansion of fossil fuel infrastructure. Under his leadership, the federal government has been actively aligning its policies with international climate frameworks and financial institutions that advocate for decarbonization. The message has been consistent and clear. Canada is committed to leading on green policy, even if it entails some short-term economic trade-offs. Federal officials, while speaking privately, were candid about their rationale. They argued that a new pipeline would effectively lock Canada into decades of emissions-heavy production, directly undermining the nation's net zero goals. From their policy perspective, approving the project would be a complete reversal of their long-term strategy and a move in the wrong direction. There were also significant political calculations behind the federal government's decision. Public and political sentiment in other key provinces, particularly Quebec and parts of Ontario, has shown strong resistance to new fossil fuel projects. Supporting a major cross-border pipeline could have risked alienating a significant portion of the electorate in these provinces, which are crucial for maintaining federal support. By blocking the deal, Ottawa reinforced its commitment to its climate-conscious base, especially in urban areas. The rejection, therefore, was not just about the specific pipeline proposal. It was a clear signal that the Carney government does not consider Alberta's oil strategy to be part of the National Economic Plan. The federal government's priorities are focused on other sectors, such as electrification, hydrogen, and critical minerals, while traditional oil exports are being consciously deprioritized. To Alberta, this felt like more than a policy disagreement. It felt like a deliberate economic obstacle being placed in its path. The chasm between these two viewpoints has only grown wider with time. Alberta's government sees the federal decision as a betrayal of its economic interests and an attempt to stifle a vital industry. The federal government, on the other hand, frames its decision as a responsible and forward-looking measure necessary to meet national and international climate commitments. This fundamental disagreement over the country's energy trajectory has created a tense and uncertain environment. It forces a national conversation about who has the final say on major economic and infrastructure projects, and whether the interests of a single province can be sacrificed for what the federal government deems to be the greater good. The provincial alliance between Saskatchewan, Alberta, and Ontario shows that this sentiment of frustration is not confined to one province, but is a shared concern among key economic powerhouses in the country. This standoff has set the stage for a period of political and economic uncertainty, as both sides dig in their heels and prepare for a long and difficult fight over the future of Canadian energy. The core issue remains unresolved. Can Canada support its resource-based economies while simultaneously meeting ambitious climate targets? Or is a fundamental collision between these two goals inevitable? The answer will have profound implications for the country's economy, its political landscape, and its place in the global energy market. Alberta's reaction to the federal government's rejection of the cross-border pipeline deal was swift and decisive. It was not a press release of frustration, but a concrete move that signals a dramatic shift in its relationship with Ottawa. Within a very short time of the federal decision, Premier Danielle Smith called an emergency press conference in Calgary. Flanked by industry leaders and her ministers, she announced a bold new plan. Alberta would proceed with a provincially backed pipeline corridor, regardless of the federal government's stance. This new plan is designed to be fully financed by private partners, with the provincial government acting to fast-track regulatory approval under its own jurisdiction. The proposed corridor would connect Alberta to the U.S. border via a new southern route, and it would leverage existing provincial land and private easements to minimize the need for direct federal environmental review. While some federal cooperation would still be necessary for infrastructure at the border crossing, the majority of the pipeline's route would be managed by the province. To further de-risk the project and encourage early investment, Alberta committed a substantial amount, $1.2 billion, in loan guarantees. Premier Smith stated that preparation for construction would begin within 12 months, sending a clear message that the province was not just talking, but acting. The announcement was not a solo effort by Alberta. Premier Smith also revealed that the province had entered into exploratory agreements with the state governments of Montana and North Dakota. These discussions included areas of energy cooperation, trade facilitation, and cross-border infrastructure planning. This move represents a significant shift towards bilateral, province-to-state engagement, bypassing the federal government entirely. It was a clear message to Ottawa. If the federal government won't facilitate access to international markets, Alberta will build its own path. The Premier was unequivocal, stating that Alberta would not be held back by what she described as ideological obstruction from the federal capital. She framed the pipeline as an economic necessity for the province, not a mere political preference. The oil sands sector is a cornerstone of the provincial and national economies, supporting over 140,000 jobs and contributing a significant portion of Canada's export earnings. In her words, Alberta was not going to stand down while the federal government chokes our future. This defiance was further underscored by another controversial element of the announcement. Premier Smith stated that the province would explore using the Alberta Pension Plan as a financial tool to support long-term energy infrastructure. This suggestion revived a debate that had gone quiet, and the message was unmistakable. Alberta money for Alberta projects, under Alberta control. It was a proposal to use provincial financial resources to achieve provincial goals, further solidifying the idea that Alberta was prepared to act independently. The province wasn't asking for permission anymore, it was taking concrete steps, with or without federal approval. This provincial-level push for greater autonomy has found support in other regions. Premiers in Saskatchewan and Ontario have publicly backed Danielle Smith's position, and an agreement has been signed between the three provinces to explore a Canadian energy corridor. The provincial alliance between Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Ontario is a powerful development in this ongoing saga. The agreement between the three provinces focuses on a shared vision to improve networks and corridors that connect their energy and critical minerals to both domestic and international markets. They plan to work together to support industry efforts in building new pipelines and refining, processing, and supply chains for energy and critical minerals. Their collaborative approach also extends to accelerating exports across industries and seeking to add more rail lines to increase capacity and enhance access to ports in places like James Bay and southern Ontario. This cooperation is not just about oil and gas. It's also about sharing expertise to advance the development of nuclear energy solutions to meet the growing electricity demands on their grids. The agreement between these provinces is a direct response to the perceived limitations and roadblocks coming from the federal government. For instance, Premier Doug Ford of Ontario has stated that the provinces are trying to make Canada's economy more resilient in the face of various threats, and that the days of relying on the United States 100%, they're done. He emphasized the need for Canada to be more self-reliant by building infrastructure that connects the country's own resources to its own markets. This sentiment is echoed by Premier Smith, who has said that the provinces are joining forces to get shovels in the ground and resources to market. The combined effort of these three provinces represents a significant political and economic counterforce to the federal government's agenda. The alliance is not only about building physical infrastructure, but also about advocating for federal regulatory changes and a more supportive environment for resource development. This united front is designed to amplify their voices and push back against federal policies that they feel are disproportionately harming their economies. The political climate in Canada is now more polarized than ever, with a clear division between the resource-producing provinces in West and Central Canada and a federal government that is prioritizing a different path. The actions taken by Alberta, with the support of Saskatchewan and Ontario, have turned a policy dispute into a fundamental question about the nature of the Canadian Federation and the balance of power between its different levels of government. The next stage of this conflict will likely involve legal and constitutional challenges, as the federal government and the provinces test the limits of their respective jurisdictions.